Paul, what's your main takeaway here? I mean, 57.5 million subscribers for a streaming service that hasn't even been around for a year seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, that's not bad. It was a little bit below expectations, as you mentioned, but still that's a very healthy number. The number that really jumped out at me is $3.9 billion. That's the COVID impact on their operating income line just for the quarter. And of that $3.9 billion, $3.5 billion came from the parks and resorts. So as you mentioned, they were just devastated here in the quarter. Now, I think the expectation is this will probably be the trough quarter for Disney here as the global economies begin to slowly reopen. But this was just a brutal quarter. And again, I think the focus on the call is, how do they believe that their parks and resorts can reopen, number one. Number two, what do they believe about how the filmed entertainment business will develop and reopen? Because that's a huge business for Disney. And then, of course, the streaming businesses and kind of the growth opportunities there. So those are going to be the focuses, I think, of the call.
Yeah, they saw a 16% decline because of the unable to release some of their films in theaters in their movie studio. I'm interested in also ESPN and sports, so many question marks about whether the sports are really going to be played for the rest of the year, what it means for that particular part of the business. And it seems as though, interestingly, the home of ESPN and ABC, their media networks, did pretty well, rising 48% in terms of profit. Is that all about programming costs being lowered rather than advertising?
Yeah, we saw that across their media networks. We saw that across their cable networks and the broadcast networks. They're just not producing a lot of content. So the revenue's still generally coming in a little bit softer than they would have anticipated, but they're just not incurring any cost of production because production on a global basis is effectively shut down and has been. So they're not spending the big money on developing these movies and TV shows. But again, that's all deferred spending. They're going to, once the Hollywood kind of cranks up again, they'll crank up their production. Those costs will go back up. So the question is, how will they monetize the movies that they already made? Will people even go to theaters anymore when we get to the other side of this? So a lot of questions for them.
Paul, in your earlier life, before we stole you away and hired you to do TV and radio for us, you are and were one of the most respected analysts on the street. Pretend you're on that analyst call. What is the question that you asked the CEO? Oh,
the key question is, do you believe that on the other side of this pandemic that your parks and resorts business can come back to its former glory? There's a real question out there just about consumer behavior across a whole bunch of things. Will people go back to restaurants? Will they go back to getting on planes? And the parks and resorts business is all about putting a lot of people in a very cramped space. And so that's going to be the big issue, I think, for them. But they've got the most experience in the industry, and I suspect that if it can be done, they will get it done.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, that call kicking off now, we're told that Bob Iger is not on that call, that this is basically Bob Chapek's ship to steer at this moment. One last question here, Paul, and this is really on content. Obviously, Disney has a ton of content. Caroline's just been running around the office doing the rap battles from Hamilton all day long. We can't get her to shut up about it. But when we talk about new content, we know Disney has that catalog. When do we see them get back to filming new content and refilling that pipeline, which I would assume is a little bit bare right now because of the pandemic?
Well, they haven't really. They have a lot of stuff in the can, which means it's already produced. It's ready to go. And whenever theaters open back up and whenever they feel like they can get that out there on a profitable basis, they'll get all that content out there. It'll take some time. And then, of course, they're going to have to ramp up production, as I said, around the world. And they've got lots of partners that they, that go into making the movies that they have. But they have the best content, the best intellectual property. And once I think, Hollywood gets cranked up again, when I say Hollywood globally, making films and TV, they'll be right there at the forefront here. So, but it's just a question for this management team. I know you've never experienced this before, but what's your best judgment about when you can crank up some of these businesses that are just devastated here in your fiscal third quarter?